Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is David Decker, and I am going to be talking with you about our first module, which is for week one, which is academic resourcing, advancement in higher education. So first, we're going to start by looking at chapter one from Massey, and then we're going to look at chapters 1 through 5 from Worth and Lambert. So that's where we will begin that's where we will begin this lesson. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and see if I can come up with the PowerPoint for this discussion. Okay, so here you guys can see the actual PowerPoint for the discussion and about academic resourcing. So what is academic resourcing? Well, it's collaborative budgeting. So it's not sitting in a room and coming up with what you think the budget is or looking at what last year's budget is and simply copying it over. Academic resourcing involves more than that. The name resourcing itself kind of gives you an indication that it's looking beyond just what the finances tells you and going out and saying, okay, who do I need to gather together to talk about what makes sense? Where's the institution heading? And how's the institution going to get there? And then what kind of funding is going to follow that desire and that need? So it's evaluation of academic value and financial ramifications. So the institution itself is always looking to add value. It's looking to make sure that people are attracted to coming to your institution, as well as that employers are finding value in the products that you're providing to the market in the terms of graduates and their abilities and capabilities. But of course, there are always financial ramifications. Unfortunately, we live in an environment where there's not just an unrestricted amount of funds. And so sometimes you have to make choices. And so what this is talking about is making sure that you're having the discussion so that you're making the right financial choices, good or bad. Many of you know, and many of you may have experienced, not all programs are going to generate revenue. Not all programs are going to be profitable, but those programs still may need to exist in order for the institution to carry out its overall mission, which is overall trying to graduate. Let's just take an example, a well-rounded student. Well, a well-rounded student needs to have an understanding of multiple disciplines. And so while not all of them are going, again, necessarily make revenue, they are going to be essential for what it is that the institution needs to carry on its mission. So the allocation of resources to further the goals of the university, as we just discussed, and those goals can change over time. And so this is always a process that's living. It's always a process that says, this is where we are as an institution today, but where do we want to be tomorrow? And many of you can look at the mission statements of your own institutions over the past decade, 2 decades, and see how many of those missions have slightly changed over time and the new programs that they have helped birth. So budgeting, as you may know, enables, while resourcing steers direction. So again, budgeting is the resource that lets the magic happen per se, or lets the new programming occur. But resourcing, having the conversation, is where the conversation about direction and where the strategy really takes place. So our main point is to get buy-in and investment from others regarding the resources you seek to deploy. It's like in so many of our tasks at work, it's if you try to go about it solo, though you may be satisfied because you think it's being done the right way, it's actually being done the wrong way. In terms of resources, you have to have people at the table. You have to have people that feel as if their voices were heard, and so that the university in general, or the institution in general, is moving in the right direction. That's how shared governance works. And so this is definitely a lesson in shared governance, in that we need to make sure that we're involving those stakeholders at the table so that they can be part of and discuss what it is that where the institution is moving from today to tomorrow, and then what it's going to take to get there, and what the resources that need to be pointed in that direction, what exactly they are, and if need be, unfortunately, where they may come from existing resources that that again may have to be re-looked at so that in order to meet the objective. So who does it involve? Well, you're going to involve two different areas. Essentially, you're going to involve the academic leadership and you're going to involve the administrative leadership. So academic leadership, I'm sure you can think of as faculty. It's the instructors, it's the researchers, it's the department chairs. Well, administrative leadership is going to start looking more like the governance part, which could include the provost, the dean, the associate dean, marketing professionals, finance professionals, and development professionals. So really, it's a sit down of all of those people. But of course, in a perfect world, that's what would happen. But at our institutions, you're lucky if you get one from each group to discuss. But that is where really the true success hides, is making sure that you do get representation from both areas and as many as possible that fit these titles. So again, so that you're able to make those determinations and make those decisions that are going to best benefit your institution. But with both groups, they tend to prioritize a little bit different things. And hopefully this is not new to you, but if it is, I'm glad to at least put it down so that you can see it for yourselves. The academics, they are the experts on what to teach, and they tend to prioritize what to teach. They tend to prioritize how to teach. Again, they're the professionals. They know how to do it. They know the technique. It's not a heavy strength on the administrative side just because simply they don't do it day in and day out as the academic side does. They're also the key on what to research. They know the complexity of the various topics at an institution and what topics are emerging. So they're keen on what it is that needs to be researched and where the new discoveries can take place. And so they're also gathering, and this is not a negative, but it's just the reality of it. And I think of it and many of you could probably agree, but they tend to gather as many resources as possible for the individual area and project. That's a survival skill, nothing wrong with it, but just in general terms, they will tend to want to beef up their own areas with resources as a priority. On the administrative side, they're a little bit more sensitive to things such as enrollment, understanding that every student is worth a certain amount of funding. And so looking at enrollment and where the enrollment trends are going, where enrollment trends are growing for certain majors, for certain projects, for certain areas, as opposed to where enrollment is declining in other areas, etc. So they'll look at enrollment numbers. They'll look at a return on investment. They'll definitely be keen on saying, well, if I invest $1 million in this project, what is our return going to look like? And is that return going to help us meet the objectives of the institution? And along that same line is the perception of the university. So looking out at the general marketplace and saying, will this project help us advance our institution? And maybe it does with a certain group, but is that group a large enough group or significant enough group that the overall perception of the university is aided and not hindered? And of course, the views of trustees, alumni, and donors. And so the administrative team, many of which can be hired through different alumni groups or trustees or donors or committees made up of those types of folks, along with folks from the academic leadership. But they're definitely more keen and more sensitive to what the views are of their trustees, of their alumni, and of their donors. Now, those aren't always perfect views, but I think you can understand that when anyone, including in your personal lives, when anyone contributes money to something, they generally feel like they have a voice. They generally feel like they have a right to discuss what's going on. In many ways, I've often believed and seen that the gift that an alum gives back to their institution can be seen as kind of a proxy vote on how they think things are going. If you don't like the institution or if you're dissatisfied in any way, you generally won't give and support it. But if you are super supportive of it, then it's a lot easier to get you to give on an annual basis And so therefore, again, thinking of the gift as a proxy vote of how alumni think things are going is pretty pretty significant. And then of course, administrative looks at the scale and the balance. So the cost versus the perceived value added. And again, I'm making it very simple here, but it's very complex. But looking at how they think the return on investment is going. So what's the overall objective of academic resourcing? Well, it's to determine the margin and the boundaries. So academic resourcing is all about determining what is the playing field. What is it that, where can we go, and then where can we not go? And what do we have to have as a return, and what's acceptable as a loss? All of those things are part of academic resourcing. So it comes down to margin, which equals benefit of an activity minus cost. That's it. Benefit of an activity minus cost. And the cost can be tangible or intangible. It can be the reputation of the school, the reputation of a program, or it can be actual costs, dollars and cents going in and out of the program. But what is that benefit and what does it cost? And making sure that at least you're staying within those boundaries of the upper and lower limits of resources deployed at the time in question. So staying within your boundaries, looking at the margins, and then getting decision makers to engage in conversation and not closed door analysis. Again, the hard part is that everyone's a professional and feel like they know their space the best, which they do. But it's to say, come outside of your space, be a little bit vulnerable with some of the others working in this field that may be cross-functional with an area you're not used to working with. So maybe you're not a researcher, but now you need to get the researcher's opinion on a certain project. And making sure you have the decision so that you guys can engage in that conversation, or having that conversation so you can engage in the decision, and it's not in a silo, but it's one that's brought out into the open air for discussion. But there's a couple of things to keep in mind. First, this may seem logical to you all, and I hope it is, but requests for input are unlikely. So it's not as if you're going to get your door knocked down from academics or from others that are saying, please give us your opinion on this thing that we're wanting to do, because they generally tend to think of things in terms of data. And really, they'll only come to you as an expert when they find that in the past or right now, that you're able to provide some useful information, that you're able to open up some ways of looking at things that they haven't thought of themselves. And that's really the key, is being able to say, yes, Professor X or Chair X, this may seem like a great idea, but let me find out what has happened in the market. Is there other institutions that have tried something similar? Are there other similar programs? And what are the paths they have gone down, and how have they been successful or not successful? And being able to provide them that type of information is pretty critical and can really help you out as you move through the process. So the process of resourcing builds a culture that makes the evidence hard to ignore and encourages constructive problem solving. Again, show the data, show that this has happened before, show that this has never happened, but we think predictively that this may be the results, and why you believe so. And so I think that, again, at this level, it's a little bit hard to get into the weeds so much because we're kind of talking theoretically, but it's important to understand that what you're actually trying to do is build that culture that says, let the data talk to itself, or lack of data talk for itself, and then let's have a discussion about what fits our institution and our mission. Each institution is different, so one thing that's going to be acceptable in institution A is not necessarily going to be acceptable in institution B, just because of the leadership and because of the missions, but just knowing in either case that having that resource meeting, having that discussion with those people at the table validates that you're doing it the right way. And this key and clutch to know throughout all this is that the university's success depends on its ability to respond to a changing environment, economics, and societal needs. And that's the bottom line. A growing institution is able to do that. It's able to respond to what society needs from it and then what the environment needs from it, and as well as adjust its program. It should never be a stagnant or just infinitely growing, but the institution needs to grow in the right way. And the only way to determine that is, again, to have this modeling discussion and to begin to engage the right people at the right time. So we'll continue more with Massey in the upcoming weeks, but this is more or less the highlight for that first chapter of reading. And so now we'll move on into our advancement in higher education, which is really starting to look more about how universities and institutions position themselves in terms of marketing, in terms of alumni giving and fundraising, and seeking that other source, that other revenue source to help them stay competitive. So what is advancement? Well, it's a partnership that requires the essential skills of strategic planning, engagement, communications, fundraising, and leading, all with an eye toward advancing the mission of the institution. So it's looking at all of these pieces and saying, how do we leverage these pieces to move the institution forward in terms of its reputation, move the institution forward in terms of its viability to live through the next couple decades and grow. Operationally, it is the combination of alumni relations, which sometimes you'll hear people say fundraising. That's overall their mission. Alumni relations raises the friends, and development, which is the fundraising piece, which goes in and then takes that relationship and says, okay, now how can we make something tangible come from it? And then public relations, which is, again, always looking for that part of growth and marketing to build a positive image for the institution, not only for alumni and the value of their degree, but for the students that are yet to come to the institution, so that they choose your institution above all others, and again, help create vitality for that institution so that it continues to operate. What advancement is trying to match the passion of a donor with the institution's missions and goals. And so when you think about what it is to be a fundraiser for an institution, or what it is to be an alumni professional for an institution, this is really what it comes down to. Is what you're really wanting to do is take whatever passion that individual person or people have and see if there's a match within the institution itself that helps them fulfill that passion, while at the same time enables the university to meet part of its mission goal. So that passion, I've seen it be all kinds of things. One common one is access. So it will simply be that a donor may say, well, I was the first person in my family to go to college. I came from this disadvantaged background, whatever it is, and therefore I want to establish a scholarship so that others that were in a similar situation to me are able to have access, that are able to meet this mission, able to reach this goal. And that's a tremendous goal. And so when the institution is able to say, that's great, well, guess what? We have tons of students that have need. We have students that are having to pay more and more out of pocket. And so that scholarship or that funding could help this student meet their academic goals. And so therefore, on one side, the donor's happy because they're able to support something that's meaningful to them, and the institution's happy because it's able to make education more affordable. Likewise, it can be something that's not related to that. Many of you may see throughout your institutions like giving towards athletics or giving toward a specific building. Again, those meet different types of needs from donors. Yes, there's definitely a tax incentive need when you're talking about large gifts where they're able to take a portion of the amount that they're giving to an institution and write that off in form of taxes. There's a tax benefit there, but there's also the need for legacy. There's the need for at some with that are really wealthy, wanting that name to carry on. So that's why you see on a lot of buildings the name of previous donors, or the name on field houses or on stadiums for certain donors and the contributions that they have made. And rightfully so, because those gifts do make a difference at the institution and do enable them to provide facilities, enable them to provide programs, and take leaps and bounds that otherwise wouldn't take place without private giving. So in the early years, The first universities abroad and in the US were tied to mission of churches and were tools to spread religion and religious occupations. So, and, again, I know that you all take a course about the history of higher education, and so I won't not delve too deeply into this, but just understanding that originally, as universities started, they were really tied to those religious organizations and providing vocations for the religious. And so, in that, they already had built in within them um, a mission, and that was pretty well understood. And over time, of course, that has changed more towards other occupations outside of religion. And so, as that's changed, now it's become a more and more where people see market value within their education, and they determine their majors, they decide their majors, they decide their occupations based on the return of investment. In 1792, Yale began to organize alumni by class year. So quite a long time ago, Yale was pretty innovative in saying, okay, now let's look at alumni, people that are graduating from our institutions by class year so that we can garner support. And originally, it wasn't necessarily financial support, it was political support. So support by making sure that certain legislation passed, making sure that certain codes were adopted, making sure that they were getting opinions from their alumni of where to take the institution. But it did eventually evolve into actual giving. And so in the early 1800s, the first appeals for support emerged. These were often face-to-face solicitations, so without coordination with the university or strategy, but simply some alumni getting together and saying, hey, we would like to make sure that this occurs at our institution. And so therefore, we're going to get together and get some gifts and present that to the institution for them to do something with it. But often they weren't coordinated. And so that led to some pretty interesting gifts. In the 1900s, universities began to evolve into hybrid models of funding. So as you can imagine, originally being purely church-based, their funding was fairly secure. And then a little bit after that, the government began to really help supplement education. Again, you learn this through your higher education history courses, but just knowing that essentially money comes into the institution in a couple forms. One is the government, so tax dollars that are helping augment education. The second being tuition dollars, or the cost of the students and their parents to pay for the education. And then the third really being public, are those contributions that come in the form of private donor contributions, or contributions from foundations, or contributions from foundations. And then the fourth is really the money that's generated from auxiliary enterprises. And auxiliary enterprises you may think of as like the bookstore, housing, those areas that may or may not actually generate profit, but sometimes they do. And when they do, then of course that revenue can be shared with the institution itself. Athletics would fall within there too. So basically those four areas are what drives funding. So universities really are now starting to seek diversification in funding model. And that's become a priority. Again, as the traditional sources of funding have shrank, then the institution has to get more creative about where it's getting funding from, because sources of funding shrink, but definitely the expenses and expenditures needed to operate the institution have only grown. So before I move into privatization, what I think is probably the best thing to say up front, and it's not part of the slide, is that, well, why would people want to give money to an alumni association or money to a foundation? Why not just give it directly to the university itself? In many ways, people don't understand that giving to an alumni association or a foundation that benefits the university is better. First and foremost, they're separate. So a university is a standalone entity, and then it will have an alumni association or a foundation, which is a separate nonprofit group. And they're separate legally, they're separate budget-wise, and there's a reason for that. The main reason is this. For instance, if you're giving to, and I'll use a state institution as my example, but if you give money directly to a state institution, then by law, that money becomes property of the state or becomes resources of the state. And as many of you have seen through the last several years, etc., sometimes when the state's budget doesn't go the way it wants or is miscalculated, whatever it may be, they have the authority to more or less sweep money, to use money, whatever they need to do to balance their budgets. The point being, you could give $1,000 directly to the state-run institution, but in an era, if it's an era of budget constraint or an area of need, that money could actually be used to fund something completely different than what you hoped it would do. And so giving money directly to the state isn't generally seen as a great move in terms of the institution or in terms of donors. Now, by giving money to an alumni association or to a foundation which supports the institution, the donor guarantees that that money is going to make it to the cause that they want it to go for, because that money now is reserved and held by the alumni association or the foundation and only allocated to the institution for those specific causes. It can no longer be under the control of the state, and therefore the donor, again, is ensured that it's going to go to what they want to support. There's a tax benefit for doing it, and it's a greater control for the individual donor and the institution. So again, just a brief part of it, but that really explains how money is given, and then the next step, which is of course the desire for privatization, which began in the early 1990s with the outsourcing of areas deemed outside of the core academic mission. So this again goes back to including the bookstores, food service, housing, parking, and security. So the universities were getting big and realizing that they weren't all great experts in these other areas, and thought, well, there's companies or there's firms that can operate these pieces for us and probably do it at higher profit margins and help us save money and deliver better services. So why not do it? And so that's where that began. And again, it was driven by cost rising higher than inflation and revenue at the institutions. And students and parents, as many of us know, are paying higher and larger portions of the cost of their education than ever before in the form of tuition. So the institutions are incentivized to find ways at which they can either make things more efficient, more better, so that the students are willing to pay for it, or to drive down costs overall. So what good privatization represents is effective public-private partnerships that enable the institution to focus resources on affordability, accountability, and quality. Again, being more efficient so that the university can take its actual revenue and focus on those things that are going to make it a better institution and make it more marketable, while privatizing and letting go to private hands some of the parts that are more business related, that are outside of education and research, but are tied to it in the form of services. So if you look at what modern university advancement is doing, the advancement officers themselves are professionals with a duty to advise university leadership on how best to develop, execute, and garner appropriate resources for the institution's strategic plan. So the advancement professional comes in, and again, this can be in the alumni relations or development, and says, these are all the pieces to the puzzle, and this is how we're actually going to make tangible steps and move forward to accomplish our goals. So strategy is often the predecessor to advancement operations. So the good old strategic plan is in there in the sense that once you've made the strategic plan, now what are you going to do with it? And I know many of us have been frustrated in the past of that exact question. Now you've made the strategic plan, and what are you going to do with it? Well, this is where advancement comes in. And very often it's the strategic plan, then you identify the institutional goals, and those institutional goals help influence the fundraising priorities. Because as you can see within the strategic plan and identifying institutional goals, it serves as a funnel, and things begin to narrow, because you can't do everything. You're not able to complete everything that's on the list of the things that the institution would like to grow in. But by strategizing and by saying, but what are the priorities, then we can get down to where it is we're really able to ask people to provide financial support to meet those goals. So some things that the Integrated Advancement Office have are shared goals with the institution, as we talked about, where they align, because again, I've mentioned they're already separate entities, but they share the common goal of advancing whatever institution it may be, but making sure that those goals align with each other. In other words, one can't be heading in a direction that the other is not willing to go. And if that is the case, then they're kind of on the path to be unsuccessful. And so being able to resolve those issues. Leadership that works to integrate assets. So what you really need here, and hopefully what our institutions are demonstrating, is that they have leadership that's cross-functional, leadership that doesn't say, this is my tower, my resources, it's hands off. Instead, at what's expected at the institution and in higher education is that you have leaders that say, my resources are for the overall goal. And what is that overall goal? And can I get on board with it? And am I open to that discussion to see what needs to happen? And therefore be part of helping to provide assets, whether that's an asset can simply be cooperation. An asset can be, let me talk to some key people that we work with or some alums that I know personally that might be interested in that type of support. But being able to work in an open environment and provide assets for each other. And to be able to expand the view of the community involvement and partnerships. So someone that doesn't just look internally at their own area, but says, how can we expand this to reach out to other partners? How can we get private organizations involved, private people involved, people that maybe are not even alums, but have an interest in this field? Maybe it's research for the blind or research for science and technology, but just knowing that there's other partners out there than besides those folks that are just within our own programs and graduate from our programs. But there's also some challenges out there for advancement. When you look at it, one, there's marketing challenges due to the perceived value of higher education for individuals and society at large. In other words, when another person looks at higher education, what do they think that value is? And is it a personal value, a personal good, or is it a societal value, societal good? In our own modern time right now, you can think of some of the debate that's coming about because of the president's move to basically help eliminate a certain portion of student loan debt. Well, there's definitely people out there that are saying, oh, this is great, this is awesome, this is a good move. But there's certainly folks that are saying this is a terrible move because why should I have to augment the cost of someone else's education? They got the benefit from it and I did not. And so that is a marketing challenge. It's fundamentally gets right to the heart of, well, what is the value of higher education? I'm a believer in, and I hope you all are too, though, that society as a whole benefits from a better educated population. Number one, if, and studies have shown that in general, salaries go up. Well, as those salaries go up, society benefits besides of the educated part of what that person was able to bring to their community, but just fundamentally and grassroots, they'll benefit from a higher increased tax base. You're making higher wages, you're paying more in taxes. That alone answers the question of what the benefit is to society at large. But I fully understand that that can be scalable and that there's some question there. And so again, it's that marketing challenge of getting people to understand what it is that they're getting out of higher education, even if they don't personally participate in it. In terms of dollars given, foundation giving exceeded individual giving in 2018. I bring this up because it's extremely important. So as we talked about in previous slides, we talked a lot about alumni giving. Alumni giving, well, that's personal giving from individuals. But now what we have seen starting in 2018 was that actual corporations, foundations are able to give more in terms of dollars than individuals. So really making big gains and taking away some of that piece that used to come from alumni themselves. So some things that are happening that probably are influencing that, and I hope none of this is new to you all, but just again, something that we need to be able to discuss is alumni debt. There's more alumni debt than before, the perceived value of degree, the awareness of money already given to the institution in the form of tuition. So alumni feeling like, well, I've already given so much to the institution because of my high tuition, which was higher than previous generations, that I don't feel like supporting it with a gift now. And of course, grassroots competition. So there's more other nonprofits out there. There's more crisis as the world shrinks and become more globalized. There's other things that may rise to the top of the priority list of things to fund, and not necessarily the institution. Uh, every time I turn around, and this isn't knocking it, but it's just the reality of it is that if there's always a GoFundMe page for someone that passed away or someone that wants to. I've even seen some for uh, people that want to take a honeymoon trip and having a GoFundMe page. So why it doesn't really matter so much what you think of those things, but just the reality is that everybody's out there raising money for something, it seems like. And so all that competition is of course taken away from what traditionally has been a pretty quiet scene for the alums and their college. So how do we mitigate some of these challenges? Well, the first and foremost is, again, and we talked about at the beginning, but being innovative and listening to the consumers, the constituents. So this just isn't students. This is students. This is faculty. This is staff. This is people. This is the business professionals that are hiring your graduates. This is the state of what's going on in your communities, but listening to all of those people to determine what it is and when we need to be moving in certain directions as an institution. Next is defining your niche and describe it in compelling ways. Not all institutions should, nor do they, offer necessarily the same thing. Some institutions actually specialize in providing very niche and very compelling forms of education. If an institution is a traditional teachers college, there's nothing wrong with, and they may find their strength in really reaching back to that and saying, this is what we do and what we do very well, and this is why we need your support to do it. Likewise, if you're an institution that really touts its success in providing great general education, great liberal arts education, then you want to tout that, because those are the things that, again, are going to be compelling, and those are the things that are going to resonate with people as to why it is that you're successful. People like to invest in success, and so they want to know that you're going to be there, you're going to be able to complete the mission, and that you're going to be around for the foreseeable future. So again, describing in a compelling way what it is that you do and why you need that support. And then offering opportunities for donors to engage in the process. So making sure that besides just getting a gift and saying, oh, thank you for that gift, which needs to happen, but that there's other ways for the institution and for the donor to connect. And so this is really where it gets into some of the work that many of you all do, even outside of advancement. But if you're working in alumni relations, if you're working in student programming, if you're working in housing, wherever it is you may be working, when you're doing those public type of events, making sure that there's opportunities for those donors to engage. Let them be part of the process. Let them interact with students. Let them see what's going on, so that, again, they see themselves in the process, and then you're set up for success. And of course, you can develop examples of how and where giving will generate significant change. I mean, it comes down to the basic thoughts of, well, with $100, we could provide emergency kits for students, things like that, that let them see the real tangible outcome that they could provide just by giving a gift at all levels. What $1,000 scholarship means at your institution. For some institutions, it may mean a lot. For others, it doesn't mean a whole bunch. But either way, giving some examples to where they can see where their money is making a difference. And then last is to demonstrate that trustworthy behavior and accountability. In the end of the day, these are financial transactions. And so being able to look back and say, we did it exactly what we said we were going to do with the resources. And look, we're accountable. You can see what we've done with the resources and that we've been good stewards. That is going to provide you more donors in the future, and definitely lay the groundwork for getting you more donors year after year. And my final thought, and this is one that I really enjoy, is that just understanding that a vision without resources is a hallucination. As funny as that sounds, think how true it is that you can want and you can aspire to anything, but if you don't have the resources to do it, if you don't have the time, energy, or talent, then it's not going to occur. And very much this relates to higher education because they can have the biggest vision out there. Any department, any university can have a grandiose vision, but until they're really able to sit down and put their resources behind it and the time it takes behind it, it's simply an hallucination. All right, so this concludes our week 1 lecture. And again, thank you guys for being with me. And I will post a question online, which I'm asking you to respond to. So make sure you go out and look at it. But essentially, what it's going to ask you all is just to think about giving in your own life, you yourself, and maybe even expand it a little bit to maybe those very close to you and the ways that they give or the things that they give to you. And simply talk about what are the things that compelled you to give to that cause or that you've seen other people give to you. What was compelling? And then on top of it, what was the expectation from the place that you gave your gift to? And then lastly, how did that make you feel? How did it make you feel? So describe the gift that you gave, what you chose to give to, and why, and what you expected from that institution, and then how it made you feel. So pretty simple question, but one that I hope you guys all have fun answering, and I will see you next time. Thanks.